Chapter 3. The Book Hookers. Connor was having a whimsical dream. He was skipping through the German countryside in a bright green lederhosen, merrily swinging a basket of freshly picked flowers. He yodeled happily as he skipped toward a picturesque village ahead of him. Everything was so peaceful and happy, he never wanted to leave. But suddenly, a screeching alarm sounded through the area. It was a familiar sound, one that he had heard many times before. Connor looked to the sky and saw an evil alien race from the television show he had watched the night before, descending upon the village and began attacking it. The dream came to an abrupt stop when Connor realized the sound was coming from his alarm clock. He smacked it a couple times more than necessary to shut it off. He was so tired he didn't even feel alive. He felt like his head was filled with a giant cloud that made it difficult to keep his eyes open. Even though he was glad he had gotten time to spend with Alex the night before, he was seriously regretting his decision to stay up so late. He got dressed and dragged Betsy down the stairs one step at a time. Bob and Charlotte were waiting for him by the front door. They had always been morning people, a race Connor could never understood. "Ready, champ?" Bob asked, spinning his car keys in his hand. Connor grunted something that sounded like yes. Charlotte had an early morning at the hospital and was already dressed for work. She put her arms around her son and hugged him tightly. "Make good choices, Connor," she said, "but most importantly, have fun." "Mom, I can't go to Germany if you're still hugging me." Connor wheezed through her tight grip. "Just need another minute," Charlotte said. "You're the only kid I've got left to hug." Once his mother finally let go, Connor threw his suitcase in the back of Bob's car and they left the house. They stopped at a fast food drive-in for a greasy breakfast, one they wouldn't have gotten away with if Charlotte was with them, and headed to the airport. Bob happily reminisced about his own European ventures as he drove. Connor faded in and out of the conversation. The subtle bumps of vibration in the car kept putting him to sleep. Eventually, they arrived at the airport and Bob pulled up to the curbside. "Before you get out, there's something I want to give you," Bob said with a very serious tone. "It isn't the birds and the bees talk, is it?" Connor asked, fearing the worst. "Because I've seen all the videos at school." No," Bob said. He paused for a moment, wondering what if that was the talk he should have been giving him instead, but then proceeded as planned. "I got you something your mom doesn't know about." Bob reached into his front pocket and pulled out a credit card. He handed it to his stepson, and Connor was shocked to see Connor Jonathan Bailey written across the bottom. "That's my name," Connor said. "You got me a credit card, Bob?" "I did," Bob said. "The PIN number is the year you were born. It's only for emergencies and only for this trip, understand? As soon as you come home safe and sound, I'm going to take it back. I know your mom is against things like this, but I'd rather you were safe than sorry. So it's our little secret, okay?" Connor excitedly bobbed his head up and down. "Absolutely. Bob, you're slowly becoming my favorite person ever. Thank you so much." Bob smiled and chuckled to himself. "Glad to hear it." He patted Connor on the back. "You're my family, Connor. I need to make sure you'll be all right. Now, go have an adventure. I mean, one by normal standards. Try to avoid the evil enchantress and talking animals as much as possible." Connor spotted Mrs. Peters standing outside the terminal entrance. She was surrounded by a group of 4 girls from school who had all just arrived as well. As excited as he was about the trip, Connor wasn't looking forward to traveling with these girls. "Don't worry," Connor reassured Bob. "The scariest thing on this trip is waiting for me over there." Connor gave Bob a hug, grabbed Betsy from out of the back, and waved goodbye as Bob drove off. He joined Mrs. Peters and the group of girls by the entrance. All the girls looked as tired as Connor. Mrs. Peters, however, looked exactly the same as she always did, which furthered Connor's theory that she was a robot. "Good morning, Mr. Bailey," Miss Peters said, perkier than ever. "Good morning, Mrs. Peters," Connor said. "Good morning, Mindy, Cindy, Lindy, Wendy." None of the girls responded, and Connor hadn't expected them to. They didn't have said a word to Connor since the school year began. Instead, they would just stare daggers at him from afar, as if he had publicly humiliated them in the past and never apologized for it. Connor couldn't think of a reason they did this, but he never spent too much thought on it. He knew the girls tended to get very strange at their age, and these four were already strange at some of the strangest girls he had ever met. Mindy, Cindy, Lindy, and Wendy had been inseparable since the first grade when they were grouped together by their teacher for a rhyming project. Together, they made up the reading club at school and spent every moment they could in the library. They would have reminded Connor of his sister if they had not been so eccentric. Mindy was the shortest, the loudest, and self-appointed leader of the group. She wore her hair in pigtails every day as if she was contractually obligated to. Cindy was the youngest, and to this day proudly told everyone that she had skipped kindergarten. She had also had a mouthful of braces, with enough metal to build a satellite. Lindy, an African-American and the tallest girl at school, she even towered over all of her teachers. She stood a bit hunched over from all the time she spent looking down at people. Wendy was painfully shy and unusually let the other girls do all the talking. She was Japanese and had very dark hair and the largest eyes Connor had ever seen on a human. He had known for a while that the four girls were going on the trip and had almost convinced him to stay home, but luckily Bree was going, which somehow made the whole trip worthwhile. "We're just waiting for Miss Campbell to arrive, and then we'll get checked in," Miss Peters said, looking up and down the curb. "You're the only boy on this trip, Mr. Bailey. Are you sure you can handle it?" "Oh, yeah," Connor said. "I'm used to it. My mom and sister used to talk about all kinds of girl things in front of me, usually over dinner, too, which I never appreciated." The girls exchanged dramatic eye rolls with one another as soon as Connor mentioned his sister. He couldn't figure out what their problem was. "Oh, here comes Miss Campbell," Miss Peters said. Connor jerked his head in the direction she was looking and saw Bree Campbell walking toward them. The exhausting clouds filled his head, instantly deflated. Just seeing her made Connor feel like he had drunk 5 energy drinks. Bree Campbell was unlike any girl Connor had ever met. She was always very calm and cool, never raised her voice or anything, and never seemed to let anything or anyone affect her in any way. She had blonde hair with a streak of pink and blue in her bangs. She usually wore bracelets and wristbands by the dozen, always wore a purple beanie, and had an earbud plugged into one ear whenever she could. "Good morning, Miss Campbell," Miss Peters said. "Good morning, everyone," Bree said with a yawn. She even yawned cooler than everyone else, Connor thought. "Let's go inside and check in," Mrs. Peters instructed, and they followed her with their luggage. One by one, they showed their passports to the lady behind the counter and checked into their flight. Connor was standing in line right behind Bree. He couldn't explain the anxiety she caused him. He was so excited to be near her, yet terrified at the same time. "She's just a girl, not a python," he said to himself over and over in his head. "Be cool. Don't try to be funny. Just act normal. And when you get back home, you need to see a doctor after this." Mindy, Cindy, and Lindy and Wendy are in row 31, A, B, C, and D, Miss Peters said, and passed out their plane tickets. And Connor and Bree are in row 32, seats A and B. Connor's heart was doing cartwheels. "I'm sitting next to Bree. I'm sitting next to Bree. Woohoo!" he thought. "But why does that seem like the best news of my life?" He got a glimpse of Bree's passport photo, which was, to no surprise, far better than his, and Bree caught him staring at it. Connor had to think fast so he didn't seem like a creeper that he was. "Your passport is much better than mine," he said. "I got mine over the summer and made a big mistake of asking if I was supposed to smile right as they took it. He flipped his passport open so she can get a glimpse at it. Kinda looks like you sneezed and it scared you, Bree said blankly. There was no trace of judgment or mockery in her voice. It was a perfectly honest description. Would you like to check your bag, sir? The lady at the counter asked. It took Connor a second to realize she was talking to him. No one had ever called him sir before. Oh, please take her, Connor said, and handed Betsy over to be tagged. The lady gave him a strange look, hearing that the suitcase had a gender. I mean, take it! Take the suitcase! Betsy was loaded onto the conveyor belt and slowly traveled farther and farther away from him. The next time he see her would be in Germany. Connor and the girls went through the security line, and their group was boarding the plane within the hour. The plane was massive. Connor couldn't wrap his head around how something so big could get into the air, even after witnessing all the magical things he had seen in the land of stories. It was still fascinating to him. They walked down the aisle and found their seats. Connor gulped when he realized how long he would have to spend in a small area. Where's your seat, Mrs. Peters? Mindy asked. All the seats around them are filling up fast. I'll be in first class, Mrs. Peters said. But don't worry, if any of you need me, just have a flight attendant notify me. I'll be in row 1, seat A. It's going to be a long flight, so get comfortable. And with that said, Mrs. Peters promptly turned on her heel and pushed her way past the oncoming travelers to the front of the plane. Connor sat down in his seat by the window, and Bree sat next to him. He stared at the back of the seat in front of him for a moment. He had no idea how to start a conversation with her. Are you okay by the window? Connor asked her. Bree looked confused. But you're by the window, she said. Connor wanted to smack his head against the stupid window. They weren't going off to a good start. Oh, right. I mean to ask if you wanted to sit by the window, he said. I wouldn't mind switching seats. I'll be fine, Bree said. I'm just going to read for most of the flight. She gestured to her bag, and Connor saw it was full of thick murder mystery novels. Bree kept getting cooler and cooler by the second. Great, let me know if you change your mind, Connor said, and returned to staring at the seat in front of him until he thought of something else to say. So, Mrs. Peters was telling me you like to write too. Uh-huh, Bree nodded. Short stories mostly. I read some of yours when I TA for Miss York last year. Very cute. They remind me of classic fairy tales. Connor couldn't believe his ears. You read my stories? Yep, Bree said. I like them a lot, especially the one about the curvy tree and the walking fish. Those were clever. Thanks, Connor said, and blushed a deep shade of red. Not only had she read them, but she also remembered them. Those were originally called The Curvy Giraffe and The Flying Frog, but I changed the titles to sound more, realistic. What kind of stories do you write? I just finished one called Cemetery of the Undead, Bree said. It's pretty self-explanatory. Connor nodded a little too much to seem normal. Sounds lovely. He felt like an idiot talking about his fairy tales, knowing that she wrote about things like cemeteries and zombies. How was he going to convince her he was cool when she was obviously the coolest person that had ever lived? I thought about changing my genre, Connor said. I think it'd be fun to write darker stories about things like that. Stories with vampires and werewolves, but no love triangles or anything. Oh, Connor, I forgot I had something I was going to ask you, Bree said. Ask me anything, Bree said. Do you have a crush on me or something? Bree asked him point blank. Connor was positive. Everything in his body came to a complete stop, starting in his brain. He could feel his cheeks filling with so much blood that he was worried his head would explode. What? He asked, as if she had asked him if he was a leprechaun. No, of course not. Why would you think that? Because you turn bright red and ramble whenever I'm around you, Bree said. She was neither exultatory nor surprised. She was just saying the facts, calmly as ever. Connor forced a laugh that was too loud to be genuine. Oh, that's nothing. That's just my sodium allergy. He was as surprised to say it as she was to hear it. Sodium allergy? Bree asked. I've never heard such a thing. It's very rare, Connor said. Makes me ramble, turn bright red, for no apparent reason. So, that explains all that. He wasn't sure how far he was planning to go with this. He couldn't tell if she wasn't convinced. Sorry, I thought since we were going to be sitting next to each other for half the day on this plane, I would ask, Bree said. I appreciate you asking, Connor said. That would have been totally awkward, just sitting here for hours and hours, one of us crushing on the other. Glad that's not the case. Connor wanted to die. He fantasized about crawling out the window and curling up in the plane's propeller. He couldn't decide what was more mortifying, given the impression that he had a crush on her, or that there may have been some truth to her suspension. Connor had never had a crush before. He wouldn't known if he had, but after being accused of having one, it slowly dawned on him that must have been his problem. He had a crush on Bree. He looked out the window, too horrified to look at anything else. What was he supposed to do now that he had been diagnosed with a crush? Was there an anti-crush pill he could take? Was there a gland in his heart that could be removed? Was it terminal? Soon the plane pulled away from the gate and proceeded to the runway. It took off with a jolt, and Connor watched the amazement as the airport below them became smaller and smaller. Amazing, Connor said under his breath. Have you ever flown before? Bree asked him. Not on a plane, Connor said without thinking. Bree squinted. Then, what did you fly on? Magic carpet? It took Connor a moment to realize that she was being sarcastic. I've been ballooning before. It was really neat, but nothing like this. Technology is almost like magic these days. You know, Arthur C. Clarke said that magic is just science you don't understand yet, Bree quoted. Connor smiled. Not always, he said to himself. Pardon, Bree asked. Oh, nothing, Connor said. That's a great quote. Bree narrowed her eyes and stared at him suspiciously. Where did you go ballooning? She asked. It's a long story, Connor shrugged it off. It was with my sister and my grandmother's, state. But this is my first time being on a plane. Looks like you have all kinds of first experiences, Bree said with a smile of her own. Luckily for Connor, she then popped an earbud into her other ear and began reading one of her books before he could panic or respond with something else embarrassing. If this was just the beginning of the trip, he didn't want to think about what the rest would entail. Connor wanted to crawl out of his skin, but Bree didn't seem at all affected by their conversation. She just kept turning the pages of her murder mystery novel, completely immersed in every word. An hour or so into the flight, Connor got up and used the restroom. When he exited the shoebox-sized stall, he was accosted by Mindy, Cindy, Lindy, and Wendy. They stood right in front of him, blocking his way back to his seat. Can I help you? Connor asked. We need to talk. They all scowled at him with the same serious eyes. They looked at him like a pack of hungry cats. Here, Connor said, at the bathroom on a moving plane? The girls nodded. We figured it was the right place to talk to you privately, Cindy said. And so you couldn't get away. Connor looked for help, but the closest flight attendant was serving drinks on the other side of the cabin. Have you been planning this ambush? Connor said. Wendy nodded. Since the end of the last school year, Wendy said. Okay, Connor said. What's up? All the girls looked to one another, excited to finally interrogate him. How's Alex doing, Connor? Lindy said. She crossed her arms. Her left eyebrow was raised so high it almost touched the ceiling. She's fine, Connor said. She's going to school and lives with my grandma in Vermont. Why do you ask? Mindy threw her hands in the air. Vermont? Vermont, he says, she declared, as if Connor had said his sister was living on Mars. Do you have any proof of this? A photo or a postcard with Alex's handwriting, perhaps? You think I'm lying to you, Connor asked. He was beginning to worry they might be onto something. How much did they already know? Cindy stepped closer and looked directly into his eyes. We practically live in the library. Last year we saw some things. Some questionable things, she said. Like what? Connor asked. Well, for starters, Alex used to come to the library every day at lunch, Minnie said. And every day she would go to the back and take one book off the shelf. She would hug and whisper sweet nothings into its spine, Lindy continued. Why would she do that, Connor? Your sister was the smartest girl in the school. It was so out of character for her to be talking to inanimate objects, don't you think? Cindy said. Wendy squinted and nodded. So you're ambushing me on a plane because my sister hugged a book, Connor asked, trying to make them seem crazy. We think she was talking to someone, Mindy said. She used to say things like, please take me away, and I want to go back. And then the next thing we know, Alex is gone, Lindy said. Left for Vermont, or so you say, Cindy said, and swiveled her head. Connor tried to make his face as expressionless as possible. He didn't want to give them any hint that their suspicions were remotely valid. You guys are insane, he said. What are you implying? Do you think Alex ran away? Minnie clenched both her fists in frustration. I don't know if she ran away, is working for the government, was abducted by aliens, or something else, she said intently. All I know is something isn't right, and I know you know the truth. And even if you don't tell us what's going on, we're going to find out. Because that's what the book huggers do, Lindy said. We read between the lies and get to the bottom of things. Wendy nodded again and punched the palm of her hand in a threatening manner. The book huggers, Connor asked. That's what we named the reading club, Cindy said. And Alex, wherever she is. However close they were to discovering the truth, they were still the most obnoxious people Connor had ever had to deal with, and that kept him from spilling any of his family secrets. I think you guys read too much, he said. He pushed his way through them and went back to his seat. He could feel their cold glares on his back as he went. When Connor sat down and noticed Bree wasn't staring as attentively at her books as before, she had pulled an earbud out of her ear. Has she been listening to the book huggers assault him? So your sister lives in Vermont now, Bree asked. Yes, with my grandma, Connor said. Bree's questions were more difficult to dodge. He felt himself waiting to tell her the truth about his sister and anything else she may have wanted to know. Vermont's pretty far, she said. It is, Connor said, but we talk on the phone a lot. So, that's where you went ballooning then, I take it. She questioned him further, starting her own interrogation. Yeah, Connor asked. Why? Just curious, Bree said blankly. So, if you've never flown before, how'd you get all the way up to Vermont? He knew she could see the uncertainty in his face. Train? Connor peeped. A coy smile appeared on her face. Interesting, Bree said. I see why they'd be suspicious. She wasn't looking at him like a boy. She thought he had a crush on her anymore, but rather the way she looked at her novels. She was the mystery she was invested in now. Bree placed an earbud back into her ear and returned to her book, occasionally side-eyeing him over the course of the flight. Connor made himself as comfortable as possible in his tiny seat. His first flight would also undoubtedly be the longest flight of his life. Alright, that is the end of Chapter 3. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more from the Land of Stories, the Grimm, and more books to come in the future. Also, if you have good ideas for me to read later on, don't forget to comment below on good reading suggestions. But hopefully, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and you all enjoy the reading. Bye!